Welcome back to the Little Grey Cells, where we explore the brilliant mind and extraordinary cases of the world's greatest detective, Hercule Poirot. Tonight, we present a tale of shattered porcelain and buried secrets, of a curse that spans decades and a killer who strikes from the shadows of the past. When a priceless Japanese mask explodes above a dying man at Christie's auction house, Poirot finds himself drawn into a mystery 30 years in the making, one that will lead him from the glittering halls of London society to the wind-swept cliffs of Northumberland, where an ancient wrong cries out for justice. So settle in, Poirot yourself a tisane, or perhaps something stronger, dim the lights, and prepare yourself for a journey into darkness. This is the Porcelain Mask Killer. The shattered remains of the porcelain mask lay scattered across the floor of the Christie's auction house, like the fragments of a broken dream. Hercule Poirot stood motionless amid the chaos, his patent leather shoes carefully positioned to avoid the debris, his keen green eyes surveying the destruction with the clinical detachment of a surgeon examining a wound. Around him, the great hall had descended into pandemonium. Women in evening gowns pressed gloved hands to their mouths, men in tailcoats shouted for order, and, somewhere in the distance, a woman's scream still seemed to echo off the vaulted ceilings. It had been, until 3 minutes ago, a rather pleasant evening. Poirot had attended the auction not with any intention of bidding, though his bank account could certainly have accommodated such extravagance, but at the invitation of his old friend, the auction house director Henri Beaumont, who had promised him an evening of cultural enrichment and excellent champagne. The champagne had indeed been excellent. The cultural enrichment had taken an unexpected turn. The mask in question, now reduced to 100 shining fragments, had been the evening's centerpiece. A 17th century Japanese No mask of extraordinary craftsmanship, depicting a demon known as Hannya, the face of a woman transformed by jealousy into a creature of terrible vengeance. It had been valued at £40,000 and had attracted bidders from 3 continents. It had also, according to the whispered legends that accompanied it, carried a curse that brought death to all who possessed it. Poirot did not believe in curses. He believed in human nature, which was, in his experience, quite capable of producing horrors without any supernatural assistance.
Monsieur Poirot!
Henri Beaumont appeared at his elbow, his normally immaculate appearance somewhat dishevelled, his silver hair escaping from its pomaded perfection.
Thank God you are here. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster.
Indeed, Poirot murmured, his attention fixed on a particular fragment of porcelain near his left foot. Though I suspect, mon ami, that the greater disaster lies not in the destruction of this valuable object, but in the manner of its destruction. Tell me, did you observe what occurred? Beaumont's face, already pale, turned the colour of old parchment.
I saw, that is to say, the lights went out, Monsieur Poirot, just for a moment, and when they returned, the mask was gone from its display case, and Lord Ashworth was lying on the floor, and then the mask came crashing down from somewhere above, and...
Lord Ashworth? Poirot's magnificent moustache twitched with sudden interest. The gentleman who had been bidding most aggressively for this object.
The same. He is...
Beaumont swallowed hard.
He is dead, Monsieur Poirot. They have moved him to the private viewing room.
Dr. Pemberton, who was among the guests, has confirmed it.
Suffocation, he believes. though how such a
thing could have occurred in a room full of people. Poirot raised one small, precise hand. "Take me to him." The private viewing room was located at the rear of the auction house, accessible through a door concealed behind a tapestry depicting the hunting of the hart. Lord Ashworth had been laid upon a velvet-covered chaise longue, his dinner jacket slightly disarranged, his face frozen in an expression of profound surprise. He was a man of perhaps 60 years, with the florid complexion of one who enjoyed his port and the thickening waistline to match. His hands, Poirot noted, were clenched into fists, and there were faint marks upon his neck, not the livid bruises of strangulation, but something subtler, almost like a rash. "Most interesting," Poirot murmured, bending closer. The scent of almonds hung faintly in the air, mingling with the deceased's cologne and the mustiness of old tapestries. "Most interesting indeed." Dr. Pemberton, a lean gentleman with the tired eyes of one who had seen too much of death, stepped forward. "I have examined him as thoroughly as circumstances permit. The cause of death appears to be asphyxiation, but I cannot account for the mechanism. There are no marks of strangulation, no signs of a struggle. It is as though he simply stopped breathing. And the marks upon his throat? A contact dermatitis of some kind. Recent, I would say, within the last few minutes. Perhaps an allergic reaction?" Poirot straightened, his fingers rising automatically to smooth his moustache. "Or perhaps, Doctor, something more sinister. Tell me, who else was present in the immediate vicinity when the lights failed?" The question was addressed to Beaumont, who had been hovering anxiously in the doorway. He produced a small leather notebook from his breast pocket and consulted it with trembling fingers. The bidding had reached £32,000. Lord Ashworth had just raised to 35. His rivals in the bidding were Lady Constance Whitmore, the American collector Mr. Jerome van der Berg, and a telephone bidder whose identity was anonymous, but who was represented by our staff member, Miss Elena Harwood. "And physically present near the display case?" Lord Ashworth himself, naturally. His daughter, Miss Cordelia Ashworth, she was standing just behind him. Lady Whitmore and her companion, a Mr. Sebastian Crane. Mr. van der Berg with his secretary. Our head of security, Mr. Blackwood, and... Beaumont hesitated. "Yes?" "And Count Dmitri Volkonsky, a Russian émigré who has been a client of ours for many years. He was not bidding on the mask, but he expressed great interest in viewing it before the auction began." Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "The Russian Count, he has a history with this object?" I do not know, Monsieur Poirot, but there were rumours, you understand, about the mask's provenance during the Revolution. It was said to have been in the possession of the Romanov family before it disappeared in 1918. Ah. The single syllable carried a weight of understanding. "And now, mon ami, I think you had better tell me who called for the lights to be extinguished." "No one called for it, Monsieur Poirot. It was a failure, electrical, we assumed. The building is old, the wiring temperamental. These things happen." "Do they?" Poirot turned his penetrating gaze upon the auction house director. "And yet I observed, when the lights returned, that only the main chandeliers had failed. The emergency lighting along the walls, the illumination in the display cases, these continued to function. A most selective electrical failure. Would you not agree?" Beaumont's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. No sound emerged. "I think, Monsieur Beaumont, that no one must be permitted to leave this building until I have had the opportunity to speak with each of them. And I think also
that you had better summon Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard. This matter, I fear, is one for the police." The inspector arrived within the hour, his familiar face appearing in the doorway of the private viewing room with an expression that mingled exasperation and relief in equal measure. Chief Inspector James Japp had worked with Hercule Poirot on more cases than either man cared to count, and while he occasionally found the Belgian detective's methods insufferably theatrical, he had long since learned to trust his results. "Poirot," he said, removing his hat and surveying the scene with practiced eyes. "Might have known you'd turn up. Can't even attend a fancy auction without stumbling over a corpse." "On the contrary, mon ami, it was the corpse that stumbled over me, or rather, fell at my feet in the most dramatic fashion. Lord Ashworth was not content merely to die. He chose to do so in the midst of the destruction of a priceless artifact, surrounded by 100 witnesses, in circumstances that defy rational explanation. The papers will have a field day. Curse of the Demon Mask claims another victim. I can see the headlines now." Japp crouched beside the body, his shrewd eyes taking in every detail. "Suffocation, the doctor says. But how? Man's throat isn't marked. No signs of a pillow or bag. Nothing blocking his airway. The marks upon his neck interest me greatly. A contact dermatitis, the good doctor believes. I wonder, Japp, if you might arrange for a sample to be taken. I have a suspicion that when analysed, it will prove to be something rather more exotic than a mere allergic reaction." "Poison, you think?" "I think that there are poisons in this world that can be absorbed through the skin, that can cause the muscles of the throat to seize and the lungs to cease their function, that can kill a man in seconds while leaving almost no trace. Such poisons are rare and difficult to obtain, which tells us something about our murderer. That he's no amateur. Précisément. And that he, or she, had access to resources beyond those of the ordinary criminal. This was not a crime of passion, Japp. This was planned with meticulous care, executed with professional precision, and designed to create maximum confusion." Japp rose to his feet, his knees cracking in protest. "The mask? The mask, I believe, was merely the spectacle, the thunder and lightning to distract us from the real crime. Consider. Lord Ashworth dies in the darkness. The lights return, and immediately our attention is captured by the destruction of a priceless artifact. Everyone looks up, not down. Everyone thinks of the mask, not of the man lying at their feet. Clever. Diabolically so. Poirot's expression grew grave. And there is another matter that troubles me, my friend. The mask was thrown from above. This much is certain from the pattern of its destruction. But the gallery above the auction hall was empty. I observed it myself before the lights failed. There was no one there. Secret passage? Hidden door? Perhaps. Or perhaps the killer is more audacious than we imagine. Perhaps they walked among the crowd, struck their blow, and then vanished into the chaos they had created." Poirot paused, his fingers once again finding his moustache. "We must speak with the witnesses, Japp. All of them. And I think we must begin with the daughter, Miss Cordelia Ashworth. She was standing directly behind her father when he died. Miss Cordelia Ashworth was a young woman of perhaps 25 years, with pale blonde hair arranged in the fashionable finger waves of the day and eyes the colour of a winter sky. She sat in a leather armchair in the auction house's private office, her hands folded in her lap, with a stillness that spoke either of tremendous self-control or profound shock. Her evening gown, silver silk with a beaded bodice, glittered in the lamplight like frost on a window pane. "Miss Ashworth." Poirot seated himself across from her, his manner gentle, his voice soft. "I understand that this must be a terrible time for you. I will endeavour to be brief."
You are Hercule Poirot. Her voice was low, cultured, with only the faintest tremor to betray her distress. Father spoke of you. He said you were the only detective worth knowing. Your father was too kind. May I ask, mademoiselle, what brought you both to the auction this evening? A shadow passed across her face. The mask. Father had been trying to acquire it for years, ever since he first saw it in a private collection in Kyoto before the war. He was obsessed with it, Monsieur Poirot. He believed... She stopped, pressing her lips together. Yes? He believed it had belonged to our family once, that it had been stolen from our ancestor, Sir Reginald Ashworth, who had been a diplomat in Japan in the 1870s. He had no proof, you understand, just family stories passed down through generations. But he was convinced. And what of the curse, mademoiselle? Did your father believe in that as well? Miss Ashworth's laugh was bitter, brittle. Father believed in nothing but what he could hold in his hands. He dismissed the curse as superstitious nonsense. He said that the only danger the mask posed was to his bank account. And yet the mask has now claimed his life. Ironic, no? If you believe that a piece of porcelain can reach out and murder a man, Monsieur Poirot, then yes. I do not believe it. Someone killed my father tonight. Someone human, with human motives and human hands. On that point, mademoiselle, we are in complete agreement. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Tell me what you observed when the lights failed. She closed her eyes, and for a moment her composure seemed to waver. We were standing before the display case. Father had just made his bid, £35,000. Lady Whitmore was about to respond. And then... darkness. Complete darkness. I heard people cry out, heard movement around me. I felt someone brush against me. I assumed it was Father, adjusting his position. Then the lights returned, and... She opened her eyes, and now they glistened with unshed tears. And he was on the floor, and the mask was falling from somewhere above, shattering into 1,000 pieces. And I knew, Monsieur Poirot. I knew before anyone else spoke that he was dead. I could feel it, the absence of him. The person who brushed against you, could you tell anything of them? Their height, their build, any distinctive feature? She frowned, her brow creasing with the effort of recollection. I remember only that they smelled of something. Something sweet. Almonds, I think. Yes, almonds. Poirot exchanged a significant glance with Jap, who had been standing quietly by the door. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful. One final question. Do you know of anyone who might have wished your father harm? The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably. When Miss Ashworth finally spoke, her voice had hardened. Everyone, Monsieur Poirot. My father was a ruthless businessman, a merciless collector, and a cold and demanding parent. He made enemies as easily as other men make friends. If you are looking for someone with a motive to murder him, you need look no further than this very room. Half the people at that auction tonight had reason to hate him. Including yourself, mademoiselle? Her eyes met his without flinching. Including myself. Lady Constance Whitmore was a woman of formidable presence, despite, or perhaps because of, her advanced years. She received Poirot in the auction house's gallery, seated upon a gilt chair as though it were a throne, her silver hair swept up beneath a tiara of diamonds that caught the light with every movement of her head. Her companion, Mr. Sebastian Crane, stood behind her like a sentinel, his handsome face carefully blank. "Monsieur Poirot," Lady Whitmore declared, extending a hand laden with rings. "I have heard a great deal about you, though I confess I never expected to meet you under such circumstances." "Nor I you, madame." Poirot bowed over her hand with old-world courtesy. "You were bidding against Lord Ashworth for the mask, I understand." "I was, and I would have won had the evening not been so rudely interrupted." Her tone was acid. "Henry Ashworth was a bore and a bully, but even he did not deserve to die with his prize shattering around him. There is something almost Greek in the tragedy of it, do you not think?" "Madame has a literary sensibility." "Madame has an extensive education and a great deal of time in which to apply it. Widowhood has its compensations." She gestured imperiously toward Crane. "Sebastian, fetch me a glass of water. My throat is quite parched from all this drama." As Crane moved to comply, Poirot observed him with interest. He was a man of perhaps 35, with dark hair touched with grey at the temples, and the sort of carefully cultivated charm that suggested either a fortune or a need to acquire one. His evening dress was immaculate, his manner deferential, but there was something watchful in his eyes, something calculating. "Mr. Crane is your secretary?" Poirot inquired. "My companion." Lady Whitmore's smile was knowing. "A widow of my years and position requires someone to manage her affairs, escort her to social functions, and keep her from dying of boredom. Sebastian performs all these duties admirably." "And tonight, where were you both standing when the lights failed?" "I was at the front of the crowd, near the display case. Sebastian was beside me. We had an excellent view of the proceedings, until, of course, we had no view at all." "You saw nothing in the darkness? Heard nothing?" "I heard chaos, Monsieur Poirot. People crying out, moving about, bumping into one another. I felt Sebastian's hand on my arm. He was trying to steady me, I believe. Beyond that, nothing. When the lights returned, Henry Ashworth was dead, and that wretched mask was in pieces on the floor." Crane returned with the water, and Lady Whitmore accepted it with a nod that contained no thanks. Poirot turned his attention to the younger man. "And you, Monsieur Crane, what did you observe?" Crane's expression flickered. Surprise, perhaps, at being addressed directly, or something else. "Very little, I'm afraid. My only concern was for Lady Whitmore's safety. The crowd was pressing in, and she is not as steady on her feet as she once was." "Sebastian, please, you make me sound like an invalid." "I merely speak the truth, my lady." Poirot nodded slowly. "Tell me, both of you, did either of you notice a scent? Something sweet, perhaps? Almonds?" Lady Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Now that you mention it, yes. I did notice something. I assumed it was someone's perfume, one of those ghastly modern concoctions." "And you, Monsieur Crane?" I noticed nothing. His tone was flat, final. "How curious." Poirot smiled, though the expression did not reach his eyes. "One more question, if you will indulge me. Lady Whitmore, what would the mask have meant to you? You acquired it. What does any beautiful thing mean to its possessor? Pride, pleasure, the satisfaction of ownership." She paused, and something dark moved behind her eyes. "And justice,
Monsieur Poirot. That mask was taken from my family in circumstances that were never adequately explained. My grandmother was Japanese, one of the first noblewomen to marry into English aristocracy. The mask was part of her dowry, until it was stolen by one of her husband's so-called friends. Sir Reginald Ashworth, to be precise. Ah. Poirot's eyebrows rose. So both you and Lord Ashworth believed the mask to be rightfully yours? I did not merely believe it. I knew it. I had documentation, letters, receipts, testimony. Henry Ashworth knew it too, which is why he was so desperate to acquire the mask before I could present my case. Dead men, it seems, tell no tales, but they also cannot sign bills of sale. You suggest that Lord Ashworth's death benefits you? Lady Whitmore's smile was cold. I suggest nothing, Monsieur Poirot. I merely state facts. Draw your own conclusions. The American, Jerome Vanderburg, was a man of considerable physical presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of one who had spent his youth in the open air, and his middle years acquiring the wealth to ensure he never had to do so again. His accent carried the flat vowels of the Midwest, though his manner suggested long exposure to more cosmopolitan circles. His secretary, a nervous young woman named Miss Helen Grey, sat beside him, her stenographer's notebook clutched to her chest like a shield. Monsieur Poirot, Vanderburg said, rising to shake the detective's hand with a grip that was almost painfully firm. I've heard of you. Didn't expect to be meeting you over a dead body, but I guess that's how things go in your line of work. It is, as you say, an occupational hazard. Poirot settled into his chair, observing the American with interest. You were bidding for the mask, I understand. I was. Not because I wanted the damn thing, pardon my language, but because my wife does. Margaret has been collecting Japanese art for 30 years. The Hannya mask would have been the crown jewel. She'll be devastated when she hears what happened. Not about Ashworth, mind you. She never cared for the man. But the mask? That'll hit her hard. You knew Lord Ashworth? Knew him? I've been doing business with him for 15 years. Oil, mostly. He had interests in Mesopotamia. I had capital to invest. We made each other a lot of money. Vanderburg's expression darkened. That doesn't mean I liked him. Henry Ashworth was a snake in a suit. He'd cheat his own mother if he thought he could profit from it. And yet you continued to do business with him. Business is business, Monsieur Poirot. You don't have to like a man to make money with him. You just have to know what he is and act accordingly. What he was, Poirot corrected gently. Tell me, where were you, standing when the lights failed? Near the back of the room, by the telephone. My wife had asked me to call her with updates, let her know how the bidding was going. I had just hung up when everything went dark. And Miss Grey? The secretary started at being addressed, her pale face flushing. I was beside Mr. Vanderburg, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Recording the bids. In the dark? No, of course not. But I was standing there when the lights went out, and when they came back on. Poirot studied her for a moment. She was young, perhaps 23, with mousy brown hair and the sort of face that was designed to be overlooked.
But there was intelligence in her eyes, and something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. Did either of you notice anything unusual? Any sound, any sensation? Vanderberg shook his head. Just confusion. People shouting, moving around. I stayed put. Figured the best thing to do was wait it out. And you, mademoiselle? Miss Grey hesitated. I thought I saw something, she said slowly. Just before the lights came back on. A flash of white moving through the crowd. Like a face floating in the darkness. A face? A mask. A white porcelain mask. The silence that followed her words seemed to press against the walls of the room. Vanderberg shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Helen has a vivid imagination, he said. The stress of the situation. I know what I saw. Her voice was firmer now, almost defiant. It was there, moving through the crowd. And then the lights came back, and it was gone. Poirot rose to his feet, his expression thoughtful. Thank you, mademoiselle. You have given me much to consider. Count Dmitri Volkonsky was a man out of time, a relic of an empire that had ceased to exist. His aristocratic bearing, his carefully groomed silver beard, his eyes the colour of a winter Baltic, all spoke of a world that had died in blood and fire 20 years before. He received Poirot in the auction house's conservatory, surrounded by orchids and ferns, his tall figure silhouetted against the glass ceiling through which the London fog pressed like a grey shroud. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his English accented but fluent. I have been expecting you. A murder in such circumstances could not fail to attract your attention. You know of me, Count. I know of everyone who matters, Monsieur Poirot. It is a habit one acquires in exile. Information is the currency of survival. Then perhaps you will share some of that currency with me. Why were you at the auction tonight? The Count's smile was enigmatic. I came to see the mask. Not to bid upon it. I have neither the means nor the inclination for such extravagances. But to see it. To stand before it one last time. This was something I could not deny myself. One last time? You have seen it before? Many times, Monsieur Poirot. The mask was in my family's possession for nearly 50 years. It hung in my grandmother's chambers in the Winter Palace, a gift from a Japanese emissary to Tsar Alexander III. I used to stare at it as a child, fascinated by its terrible beauty, by the rage and anguish frozen in those porcelain features. And when was it taken from your family? In 1918, when everything was taken from us. The revolution devoured our world, Monsieur Poirot. Our palaces, our fortunes, our very lives. My parents were executed, my brothers scattered to the winds. I alone escaped, and I carried nothing with me but the clothes on my back and the memories in my heart. Yet the mask survived. So it would seem. It appeared in Paris in 1920, in the hands of a dealer who claimed to have purchased it from a Bolshevik official. I tracked it across Europe for years, watching it pass from collector to collector, always just beyond my reach. When I heard it was coming to auction in London, I knew I had to attend. To say farewell, if you will. Poirot studied the Count's face, searching for any sign of deception. You had no intention of reclaiming it? With what? Prayers and memories? The Count's laugh was bitter. I am a proud man, Monsieur Poirot, but not a foolish one. The mask is lost to me, as is everything else I once treasured. I came tonight not to possess, but to remember. And what do you remember of the moment the lights failed? The Count's eyes grew distant. I was standing apart from the crowd, near the east wall. I had no desire to participate in the spectacle of the bidding. I found it distasteful, all these wealthy foreigners squabbling over my grandmother's treasure. When the darkness fell, I did not move. I simply stood and waited. You saw nothing, heard nothing? I heard the sounds of confusion that one would expect, but I also heard... He paused, frowning. Footsteps, quick and light, moving with purpose through the darkness. They passed quite close to me, heading toward the display case. Could you tell anything of the person making them? Only that they walked with the confidence of one who knew exactly where they were going. Not stumbling, not hesitating. Moving with precision, as though the darkness was no impediment to them at all. Poirot's interest sharpened, as though they had rehearsed the route. Precisely. And the scent of almonds, did you notice that? The Count's face went very still. Almonds? No. But I noticed something else, Monsieur Poirot. Something that has troubled me since it occurred. Just before the lights returned, I heard a sound, a soft sound, like silk sliding against silk. And then, a sigh. A long, satisfied sigh, very close to where Lord Ashworth must have been standing. A sigh? Or a breath? The last breath of a dying man, perhaps. Or the breath of his killer, savouring the moment of his triumph. The interviews continued into the small hours of the morning. Elena Harwood, the young woman who had been manning the telephone for the anonymous bidder, proved to be a pale, composed creature, answered questions with a precision that bordered on mechanical. She had seen nothing, heard nothing, noticed nothing unusual. Her telephone bidder, whose identity she claimed not to know, had dropped out of the auction at £30,000 and had rung off without explanation. The connection, she said, had been excellent throughout. Blackwood, the head of security, was a former military man, with the bearing of one accustomed to command and the frustration of one who had failed in his duty. He had been near the main doors when the lights failed, he said, monitoring the crowd for any signs of trouble. He had seen nothing suspicious before the darkness fell, and had been too far from the display case to observe anything when it returned. Throughout these interviews, Poirot remained courteous, patient, and utterly inscrutable. He asked questions that seemed irrelevant, pursued tangents that led nowhere, and occasionally fell into silences that stretched uncomfortably. Jap, watching from the corner, could not tell if the Belgian detective was making progress or merely marking time. Finally, as the first grey light of dawn began to seep through the auction house windows, Poirot rose from his chair and announced that he had heard enough. "You have your murderer, then?" Jap asked. "I have theories, mon ami, many theories, but theories are like shadows. They suggest the shape of truth without revealing it entirely. To catch this killer, I will need to do more than think. I will need to act." "And what action do you propose?" Poirot's smile was small and secretive. The mask was stolen from Lord Ashworth's ancestor, or so Lady Whitmore claims. It was taken from Count Volkonsky's family by revolution and violence. It has passed through many hands, leaving death and misfortune in its wake. Tonight, it was destroyed, shattered beyond any hope of repair. And yet, Jap, I cannot help but feel that its story is not over. That somewhere in the fragments of that porcelain face lies the key to everything. The mask is evidence. I'll have the pieces collected and... Do not trouble yourself. The pieces tell us nothing that the mask itself did not tell us. The killer was clever enough to destroy it, not because of what it might reveal, but because of what its destruction would conceal. And what is that? Poirot turned toward the window, watching the fog lift slowly from the London streets. That is what I intend to discover. But first, I think, I shall need to pay a visit to Ashworth Hall. The answers we seek are not here, among the debris of broken dreams and shattered porcelain. They are in the past, Jap. Always in the past. The journey to Ashworth Hall took the better part of a day. The estate lay in the remote reaches of Northumberland, perched on a cliff above the grey and restless sea, accessible only by a single road that wound through moorland that seemed to stretch to the very edge of the world. As Poirot's hired car approached the hall, itself came gradually into view. A massive pile of grey stone that seemed to have grown from the cliff itself, its towers and battlements black against the lowering sky. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured to himself, drawing his coat more tightly around his shoulders. Who would choose to live in such a place? The driver, a taciturn local man named Hobbs, grunted in response. Ashworths have been here 400 years, sir. Suppose they're used to it. And the family? They are expecting me? Miss Cordelia telephoned ahead. She arrived this morning by the early train. The car drew up before the great oak doors of the hall, and a butler emerged to greet them. A tall, cadaverous figure with the mournful aspect of an undertaker. He introduced himself as Graves and ushered Poirot into an entrance hall of cavernous proportions. Its walls hung with armour and ancestral portraits, its flagstone floor echoing with every footstep. Miss Ashworth is in the drawing room, Graves intoned. She has requested that you join her when you are ready. I shall have your bags taken to your room. The drawing room was somewhat less forbidding than the entrance hall, though warmth remained a relative term. A fire burned in the massive stone fireplace, but its heat seemed to dissipate long before reaching the room's farther corners. Miss Cordelia Ashworth sat before it, still in the black dress she had donned for her journey, her face pale and drawn. Monsieur Poirot, she rose to greet him. Thank you for coming. I know this is an imposition. On the contrary, mademoiselle, I am grateful for the invitation. There is much I wish to learn about your father's history, and this house, I suspect, holds many secrets. More than you know. She gestured toward a chair. Please, sit. I shall have tea brought, and then... She paused, her expression darkening. And then I must tell you about the porcelain mask killer. The porcelain mask killer? Poirot settled into the offered chair, his interest piqued. This is a name I have not heard before. It would not have been. The story was kept from the papers, buried by my grandfather's influence and my father's money. But it is a name that has haunted this family for 30 years. Tell me. Cordelia moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames as though seeking strength from their flickering light. In 1908, when my father was still a young man, there was a house party here at Ashworth Hall. 30 guests gathered for the Christmas season. Among them was a young woman named Lydia Chen, a renowned beauty of mixed Chinese and English heritage, who was engaged to be married to my father. Your father was engaged before your mother? Yes, though the engagement was not widely known. My grandfather disapproved of the match. He had his own plans for my father's future, plans that did not include a woman of Asian descent, no matter how wealthy or well-connected her family might be. And what happened to this Lydia Chen? She was murdered on Christmas Eve in the gallery above the Great Hall. She was found with a porcelain mask pressed over her face, the very mask that was destroyed at the auction. She had been suffocated, Monsieur Poirot. suffocated while the mask was held against her mouth and nose. Poirot's eyebrows rose sharply. This is most significant. And the killer was never found. Never. The investigation was brief and inconclusive. My grandfather saw to that. The official verdict was suicide, the despair of a young woman rejected by her fiancé. But everyone who knew Lydia knew that was a lie. She was vibrant, ambitious, full of life. She would never have taken her own life. And the mask? It disappeared, vanished from the crime scene before the police could examine it. It was assumed to have been taken by the killer as a trophy. For 30 years, we heard nothing of it. And then, 5 years ago, it reappeared, in the collection of a dealer in Tokyo. Who had acquired it? The dealer claimed to have purchased it from a private collector in Shanghai, who had purchased it from a Russian émigré in Paris, who had claimed it was taken from the Winter Palace during the Revolution. The trail was too tangled to follow. Cordelia turned from the fireplace, her eyes meeting Poirot's. But my father was convinced it was the same mask. He began to investigate, quietly, obsessively. He believed that if he could trace the mask's history, he might discover the identity of Lydia's killer. And did he? I don't know. He never spoke to me of his findings. But in the weeks before his death, he was different. Agitated, distracted. He said he was close to the truth, that he knew who the porcelain mask killer was, and that soon he would have proof. And you believe his death is connected to this discovery? I believe someone killed him to prevent him from revealing what he knew. The same person who killed Lydia 30 years ago, or someone connected to them. The killer used the mask to murder my father, Monsieur Poirot, just as they used it to murder his fiancée. And then they destroyed it, to prevent anyone from ever connecting the crimes. Poirot was silent for a long moment, his mind working through the implications. You have given me much to consider, mademoiselle. But there is one thing I do not understand. If the mask was used to commit these murders, physically pressed against the victims' faces, how was it used against your father? He was not suffocated in that manner. He died from a contact poison, administered through the skin. Cordelia's face went very still. A contact poison? The marks upon his throat, the scent of almonds in the air, these suggest a compound applied to some surface that he touched, or that touched him. Then someone has modified the method, adapted it for a modern age. She shuddered. That makes it worse, somehow. The cold calculation of it. Indeed. But it also tells us something important. This killer is intelligent, adaptable, patient. They have waited 30 years to strike again. They must have had a powerful reason to do so now, and an equally powerful reason to ensure that the mask could never be used as evidence. What will you do? Poirot rose from his chair, moving to examine a portrait that hung above the fireplace. It showed a young woman of striking beauty, with dark eyes and high cheekbones, and the mouth curved in a secret smile. This is Lydia Chen. Yes. My father kept her portrait here, despite my mother's objections. I think he never stopped loving her. She was beautiful. She was more than beautiful. She was brilliant, accomplished, fearless. She could have been anything, Monsieur Poirot. Instead, she was murdered at 23, and her killer was never brought to justice. Poirot turned from the portrait, his expression grave. Then that is what I will do, mademoiselle. I will find the porcelain mask killer. For Lydia, for your father, and for the truth, which has been too long buried. The household at Ashworth Hall proved to be larger than Poirot had anticipated.
In addition to Miss Cordelia, there were servants who had been with the family for decades, distant relations who had arrived for the funeral, and one particularly unexpected guest. A woman who appeared at dinner that evening as though she had materialized from the fog itself. Lady Ashworth. Cordelia's voice was cold as she made the introductions. My stepmother. She was in Italy when father died. Stepmother? Poirot had not been informed of a Lady Ashworth. He studied the newcomer with interest. She was perhaps 40, with red hair arranged in elaborate curls and a figure that her mourning dress did little to conceal. Her eyes were green and calculating, and her smile held no warmth at all. Monsieur Poirot, she purred, extending a hand laden with rings. I have heard so much about you, though I must confess I do not understand why you are here. Henry's death was a tragedy, of course, but surely Scotland Yard is capable of conducting the investigation without assistance. Madame, Scotland Yard has its methods, and I have mine. Miss Cordelia was kind enough to invite me to examine certain historical records that may be relevant to the case. Historical records? Lady Ashworth's laugh was light and brittle. How delightfully antiquarian. I do hope you won't tire yourself with dusty old papers when there is so much to enjoy here at the Hall. The gardens are quite spectacular, even in winter. I shall endeavour to find a balance, madame. Dinner that evening was a tense affair. In addition to Cordelia and her stepmother, the table included Mr. Charles Ashworth, Lord Ashworth's younger brother, a faded gentleman of nervous disposition, and his wife, Margaret, a stout woman with the penetrating gaze of one who missed nothing. There was also Dr. Timothy Vane, the family physician, an elderly man with trembling hands and kind eyes who had known the Ashworths for 40 years. You were here in 1908, Poirot observed to the doctor as the soup was served. During the house party when Miss Lydia Chen was killed. The conversation around the table fell silent. Lady Ashworth's spoon paused halfway to her lips. Charles Ashworth went very pale. I was, Dr. Vane acknowledged. A terrible business. One of my greatest regrets that I could not do more to help. You examined the body? I did. She had been dead for several hours when I was called. There was nothing I could do but confirm what was already apparent. And the cause of death? Suffocation. The mask was... He hesitated, glancing at the ladies. It was pressed against her face with considerable force. There were marks on her shoulders where someone had held her down. Someone strong, then? Yes, or someone who caught her by surprise. The party that Christmas. Do you remember who attended? Dr. Vane set down his spoon, his brow furrowing with the effort of recollection. It was 30 years ago, Monsieur Poirot. My memory is not what it was. But I remember that there were many guests, friends of the family, business associates of the old Lord Ashworth, some young people from the London season. Lydia was there, of course, and Henry, Charles and Margaret, who were newlyweds at the time, a Russian prince, I believe, or was he a count? There was an American industrialist and his daughter, a solicitor from London, a military man who was a friend of the old lord's, and others whose names I have forgotten. A Russian noble? Yes, now that I think of it, a handsome young man with excellent manners. He and Lydia seemed quite friendly. perhaps too friendly in some opinions. There were rumours that Henry was jealous. Jealous enough to kill? The silence that followed this question was deafening. It was Charles Ashworth who finally broke it. My brother was many things, Monsieur Poirot, but he was not a murderer. He loved Lydia. Her death destroyed him. He spent 30 years trying to discover who killed her. And perhaps he succeeded, Poirot said quietly. Perhaps that is why he is dead. After dinner, Poirot retired to the library, where Cordelia had arranged for him to examine her father's papers. The room was vast and cold, its walls lined with leather-bound volumes that had likely not been opened in decades. But in the centre of this literary mausoleum, on a great oak desk, lay a collection of folders, notebooks, and photographs that represented the late Lord Ashworth's 30-year obsession. "This is everything," Cordelia said, lighting the lamps against the encroaching darkness. "His notes, his correspondence, his research. I have not read it all myself, there is too much, but I hope you will find what you are looking for." "Thank you, mademoiselle. You should rest. This will take many hours." "I cannot rest, Monsieur Poirot. Every time I close my eyes, I see him lying on that floor, with the fragments of the mask scattered around him."
I need to know the truth. I need to understand why this happened.
"Then sit with me. Read with me. Perhaps together we will see something that neither of us would see alone."
They worked through the night, sorting through decades of accumulated evidence. Lord Ashworth had been thorough, if somewhat disorganized. His notes ranged from meticulous timelines to rambling speculations. His correspondence included letters to dealers, museums, private collectors, and at least one psychic medium who claimed to be in contact with Lydia's spirit. But gradually, a picture began to emerge. Lord Ashworth had traced the mask's movements from Ashworth Hall in 1908 to its appearance in Tokyo in 1933, identifying a succession of owners that included an English collector who had died under mysterious circumstances, a French aristocrat who had lost his fortune in the crash of '29, and a Chinese merchant who had been murdered in Shanghai in 1931. At each step, the mask seemed to leave a trail of misfortune in its wake.
"The curse,"
Cordelia murmured, reading one of her father's notes.
"He began to believe in it, despite himself. He wrote here that the mask carries the spirit of the woman it was made to represent, the jealous demon Hannya, who destroys all who possess her."
And yet he pursued it nonetheless.
"For Lydia. He believed that the mask was the key to finding her killer, that whoever had taken it from Ashworth Hall that night in 1908 must have been her murderer."
Poirot set down the paper he had been reading, his expression thoughtful.
"There is something here, mademoiselle. A name that appears repeatedly in your father's notes. Someone he was investigating in the months before his death." "Who?" "He refers to this person only as V. The initial appears in connection with the Russian collector who first owned the mask after its disappearance. A collector who, according to your father's research, was not Count Volkonsky, but someone else entirely. Someone who claimed to have acquired the mask in London in 1908 from a desperate seller who needed money to flee the country." "Flee the country? But who would have had access to the mask that night? It was kept in a locked display case in the gallery." "An excellent question. According to your father's notes, Only 4 people had keys to that case. The old Lord Ashworth, the butler of that time, your father himself, and... Poirot paused, his eyes widening slightly. And the Russian guest, Prince, or rather Count, Dmitri Volkonsky. Count Volkonsky? But he was at the auction. He was there when my father died. Indeed he was. And now I begin to understand why. The following morning dawned grey and cold, with a bitter wind that swept in from the sea and rattled the windows of Ashworth Hall like the fingers of some restless ghost. Poirot breakfasted alone, his mind still churning with the revelations of the night before, and then requested that Graves show him to the gallery where Lydia Chen had met End. The gallery was a long, narrow space on the second floor. Its walls hung with portraits of Ashworth ancestors whose stern faces seemed to follow every movement. At one end, a great window looked out over the sea. At the other, a doorway led to the family's private chambers. Between them, the floor was of polished oak, and the ceiling was high and shadowed. "This is where she was found?" Poirot asked, indicating a spot near the centre of the gallery. "Yes, sir. Graves had been in service at Ashworth Hall for 40 years, though he had been a mere footman at the time of Lydia's death. Just there, beneath the portrait of Sir Reginald, the gentleman who first brought the mask to England." Poirot looked up at the portrait in question. It showed a stern-faced Victorian gentleman in diplomatic dress, his hand resting on a table upon which several Japanese artifacts were displayed. Among them, unmistakably, was the Hannya mask. "Tell me what you remember of that night." Graves was silent for a moment, his ancient face working with the effort of recollection. "It was Christmas Eve, sir. There had been a party, a grand affair, with dancing and champagne and all the trappings of the season. Miss Lydia was the belle of the ball, as they used to say. She danced with everyone, the young Lord Ashworth, his brother Charles, the Russian Count, even old Colonel Blackwood. She was radiant, sir, alive in a way that seemed to fill the whole room." "And when did you last see her?" "Just before midnight, sir. She slipped away from the party, saying she wished to look at the mask one last time before the evening ended. She had a fancy for it, you see. Said it reminded her of something from her childhood in China." "She went to the gallery alone?" "As far as I know, sir. The next time anyone saw her, she was..." Graves's voice broke. "She was lying just there, with that terrible thing pressed against her face. The young master found her. Lord Henry, I mean, though he was just Mr. Henry then. He screamed so loud the whole house came running." "And the mask was gone?" "Gone, sir. Vanished as though it had never been. There was a great search, the police, the guests, everyone. But it was never found. Until now." Poirot walked slowly along the gallery, his eyes scanning every surface, every shadow. "The display case. Where was it?" "Just there, sir." Graves pointed to a spot near the window. It was a glass case on a marble pedestal, locked, with a key that was kept in the old master's study. "And who had access to that key?" "Only the family, sir. The old Lord Ashworth, the young masters, and..." He hesitated. "And the guests, I suppose. The study was not locked during the party. Anyone might have slipped in and taken it." "I see." Poirot paused before the window, looking out at the grey expanse of sea and sky. "One more question, Graves. On the night of the murder, was there a Count Volkonsky among the guests?" "Yes, sir. Count Dmitri Volkonsky, a Russian nobleman, very charming, very elegant.
He was quite attentive to Miss Lydia, I recall. Some said too attentive. And after the murder, what became of him? He left the next morning, sir. Said he could not bear to remain in a house where such a tragedy had occurred. The police questioned him, of course, but he had an alibi. He was in the card room with several other gentlemen at the time of the murder. An alibi? Poirot murmured. Yes, of course. One would expect nothing less. The investigation at Ashworth Hall continued for 3 more days, during which Poirot interviewed servants, examined documents, and spent long hours in contemplation before the fire in the library. He spoke with Dr. Vane about the medical details of Lydia's death, with Charles Ashworth about the family's history, and with Lady Ashworth about her late husband's final months. He was unfailingly courteous, infuriatingly vague about his progress, and utterly resistant to all attempts to discover what he knew. On the 4th day, a telegram arrived from Inspector Japp. The analysis of the substance found on Lord Ashworth's throat had been completed. As Poirot had suspected, it was a rare poison, a derivative of the Calabar bean, traditionally used by certain African tribes for trials by ordeal. Applied to the skin, it caused rapid paralysis of the muscles, including those controlling breathing. Death would follow within minutes. Calabar bean, Poirot read aloud, his voice thoughtful. Not a poison easily obtained. One would need connections to the African colonies or access to a well-stocked chemical laboratory. Does this help your investigation? Cordelia asked. It narrows the field considerably. Our killer is someone with specialized knowledge and resources. Not a common criminal, but a person of education and means. Someone who has had 30 years to plan their revenge. Revenge? You believe the killer is avenging Lydia? I believe the killer is connected to Lydia, but whether they seek to avenge her or to silence those who knew the truth about her death, I cannot yet say. The 2 motives lead to very different conclusions. That evening, as the household gathered for dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived. The butler announced Count Dmitri Volkonsky, and moments later, the Russian émigré appeared in the doorway of the drawing room, his tall figure casting a long shadow across the carpet. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice smooth as velvet. "I have come to pay my respects to the family, and to offer my assistance to Monsieur Poirot, if he will accept it." The reaction to his arrival was immediate and dramatic. Lady Ashworth went pale. Charles Ashworth rose from his chair with an exclamation of surprise. Dr. Vane dropped his sherry glass, shattering it on the hearth. Only Cordelia remained composed, though her eyes had gone cold as ice. "Count Volkonsky," she said, her voice level. "This is unexpected. I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was in the north on business, and thought it only proper to express my condolences in person. Your father and I had our differences, but I respected him. His death was a great tragedy." "A tragedy you witnessed firsthand," Poirot observed. "You were at the auction, Count. You were standing near Lord Ashworth when he died." "As were many others, Monsieur Poirot. I was not the only one present." "No, but you may have been the only one with a connection to both murders. Lord Ashworth's death last week, and Lydia Chen's death 30 years ago." The Count's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. "I was questioned about Lydia's death at the time. I had an alibi. I was cleared of all suspicion." "Alibis can be manufactured, Count, especially by a man of your intelligence and resources." "You accuse me?" "I observe, Count. It is what I do. And I have observed
that you have connections to this case that you have not fully disclosed. The mask, for instance. You claimed it belonged to your family, that it was taken during the Revolution. But Lord Ashworth's research suggests otherwise. He believed the mask was sold to a Russian collector in London in 1908. Sold by someone who had stolen it from this very house on the night of Lydia Chen's murder.
The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. "You have been busy, Monsieur Poirot," the Count finally said. "I had hoped that Henry's death would end his inquiries. It seems I was mistaken."
You hoped his death would end his inquiries. An interesting choice of words, Count.
I did not kill Henry Ashworth, nor did I kill Lydia Chen. I am many things, Monsieur Poirot, but I am not a murderer.
Then perhaps you will tell me what you are. The truth, Count. All of it. Or I shall be forced to draw my own conclusions. Conclusions that may prove considerably less favorable to your interests.
The Count stood motionless for a long moment, his face a mask of aristocratic composure. Then, slowly, he moved to a chair and sank into it, as though the weight of decades had suddenly become too much to bear. "Very well, Monsieur Poirot. I will tell you. Not because I fear your conclusions, but because I am tired of secrets. 30 years of silence is enough for any man." The Count's story began in St. Petersburg in the winter of 1905, when he had first met Lydia Chen at a ball hosted by his family. She had been 18 years old, newly arrived from London, and more beautiful than any woman he had ever seen. He had fallen in love with her instantly, hopelessly, with the passionate intensity of youth. "She was kind to me," he said, his voice distant with memory. "We became friends, close friends, but nothing more. She was engaged to Henry Ashworth, and she was loyal to him, despite everything. Despite his father's opposition to the match, despite the whispers and the rumours. She loved him, Monsieur Poirot. Truly loved him.
And you?
I loved her. But I knew my love was hopeless, and so I contented myself with her friendship. I accompanied her to London, to parties and galleries and the opera. I was her confidant, her protector, her devoted servant. And then came Christmas of 1908. He had been invited to Ashworth Hall at Lydia's request. She wanted a friendly face among the hostile aristocrats who looked down upon her mixed heritage. He had attended the party, watched her dance with Henry, watched the joy in her eyes as she spoke of their future together. And then she died, the Count said. Murdered in that gallery, with the mask pressed against her face. I found her, Monsieur Poirot. Not Henry. Me. I had followed her when she slipped away from the party, worried that she might be in danger. But I was too late. When I reached the gallery, she was already dead. And the mask? I took it. I know how that sounds, but I was not thinking clearly. I saw her lying there, with that terrible thing on her face, and I could not leave it there. It seemed obscene somehow, like a final insult. So I took it, and I fled. You fled the country? Yes. I knew how it would look. The rejected suitor, found at the scene of the crime, clutching the murder weapon. I would have been hanged, Monsieur Poirot, and the real killer would have gone free. So I ran. I sold the mask to fund my escape, and I spent the next 30 years trying to forget what I had seen. But you could not forget. Never. Lydia's face haunted me every night. I tried to tell myself that I had done the right thing, that my survival served some greater purpose. But the truth is, I was a coward. I should have stayed, should have fought to clear my name and bring her killer to justice. Instead, I ran, and the killer went free. Poirot studied the Count's face, searching for any sign of deception. If you are innocent, as you claim, then you must have some idea who killed her. You were there at the scene. You must have seen something. I saw nothing. The gallery was dark. The candles had been extinguished. I found her by the light of the window, lying in a pool of moonlight. She was still warm when I touched her. The mask was still on her face. And the killer? Gone. Vanished. Like a ghost. Ghosts do not kill, Count. People do. Then find the person, Monsieur Poirot. Find them, and I will die a happy man. The breakthrough came the following morning, in the most unexpected of places. Poirot had risen early, as was his habit, and had taken a walk through the grounds of Ashworth Hall, despite the bitter cold. He found himself drawn to the cliff edge, to the spot where land gave way to sea, and there he stood for a long time, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Monsieur Poirot? The voice came from behind him, soft and feminine. He turned to find Miss Helen Grey, the American's secretary, standing a few paces away, her face pale, her eyes red from recent weeping. Mademoiselle Grey, this is a surprise. I did not know you were at the hall. I arrived this morning. Mr. Vanderburg sent me to retrieve some papers from Lord Ashworth's solicitor, but She hesitated, her hands twisting together. I needed to speak with you, Monsieur Poirot. Alone. Then speak, mademoiselle. I am listening. I lied to you, at the auction. When I said I saw nothing in the darkness, that was not true. I did see something. Someone. Go on. It was just a glimpse when the lights were beginning to come back on. I saw a figure standing over Lord Ashworth's body. A woman, I think. She was wearing a long dress, and her hair was dark. And she was holding something against his throat. Something small and white. A mask? I don't know. It might have been. I only saw it for a moment, and then the lights were fully on and she was gone. Vanished into the crowd. Why did you not tell me this before? Miss Grey's face crumpled. Because I was afraid. Because I knew who the woman was, and She stopped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Who was she, mademoiselle? Lady Ashworth. The woman in the darkness was Lady Ashworth. The confrontation took place that afternoon, in the drawing room of Ashworth Hall, with all the principal actors assembled. Lady Ashworth sat in a chair by the fire, her face composed, her green eyes revealing nothing. Cordelia stood by the window, her expression frozen. Charles Ashworth and his wife had taken up positions near the door, as though ready to flee at any moment. Dr. Vane sat quietly in a corner, his old hands folded in his lap. And Count Volkonsky stood apart from the others, watching the proceedings with the intensity of one who has waited 30 years for answers. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his posture erect, his eyes bright with the light of revelation. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, We are gathered here to bring to a close a story that began 30 years ago in this very house on a Christmas Eve that should have been a celebration but became instead a tragedy. The murder of Lydia Chen has remained unsolved for 3 decades. Her killer has walked free, untouched by justice, unpunished by law. But today, that ends. Lady Ashworth's smile was thin. How dramatic, Monsieur Poirot. But I fail to see what an ancient murder has to do with any of us. Everything, madame. Because the person who killed Lydia Chen 30 years ago is the same person who killed Lord Ashworth last week. The same method, the same motive, the same cold calculation. The porcelain mask killer has struck twice, and would have struck again had they not been stopped. "And who is this killer?" Charles Ashworth demanded. "If you know, for God's sake, tell us." "Patience, monsieur. Let me tell you first what I have learned." Poirot began to pace, his movements precise, his voice measured. Lydia Chen was not killed by a jealous lover, nor by a random madman. She was killed because she had discovered a secret so dangerous that someone was willing to commit murder to keep it hidden. "What secret?" Cordelia asked. "The secret of the mask itself. You see, the Hannya mask was not merely a valuable antique. It was also a hiding place, a container for something far more precious than porcelain. Inside the mask, concealed in a hollow space behind the demon's face, was a document that proved the illegitimacy of the Ashworth claim to this estate. The silence that followed was like the silence before a storm. "Impossible," Charles Ashworth breathed. "Not impossible, monsieur, merely hidden. Lord Reginald Ashworth, who brought the mask from Japan, was not the true heir to Ashworth Hall. He was the illegitimate son of a servant, substituted for the genuine heir who died in infancy. The document in the mask was the confession of the nurse who made the switch, a confession she had entrusted to a Japanese diplomat who had concealed it in the mask for safekeeping. But how could anyone have known this? Lydia Chen knew. Her grandmother had been in the service of the Japanese embassy. She had heard the story from the diplomat himself. When she saw the mask at Ashworth Hall, she recognized it and realized its significance. She told someone what she knew, and that someone killed her to prevent the secret from being revealed. "Who?" Lady Ashworth's voice was sharp. "Who did she tell?" Poirot turned to face her, his eyes cold. "She told you, madame. Or rather, she told the person you were then, before you became Lady Ashworth. Before you married a man more than 20 years your senior in order to secure your position in the family you had once tried to destroy." Lady Ashworth rose from her chair, her face contorted with fury. "How dare you?" "I dare, madame, because I have proof. The mask was destroyed at the auction, but its contents were not. Lord Ashworth had already removed the document and hidden it among his papers. I found it last night, the original confession, along with your father's response. Your father, madame, was the solicitor who handled the Ashworth family's affairs in 1908. He discovered the truth about the inheritance and saw an opportunity for blackmail. When Lydia Chen threatened to reveal what she knew, he sent you to silence her. This is absurd. You were 17 years old, young enough to be overlooked, old enough to kill. You attended the party as a guest of your father, and when Lydia slipped away to the gallery, you followed her. You took the key from your father's pocket, opened the display case, and pressed the mask against her face until she stopped breathing. Then you fled, taking the mask with you, and left an innocent man to take the blame. The Count arrived too late to save her, but soon enough to be accused of her murder. He took the mask because he loved her, because he could not bear to see her defiled by its touch. He sold it because he needed money to escape. And you waited. You watched him flee, watched the investigation collapse, watched your secret remain hidden for 30 years. Lady Ashworth's composure finally cracked.
You have no proof of any of this.
On the contrary, I have the testimony of Miss Helen Grey, who saw you standing over Lord Ashworth's body at the auction. I have the analysis of the poison that killed him, a poison that requires specialized knowledge to obtain. Knowledge you acquired during your years in Africa with your first husband. And I have this. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small object, a piece of white porcelain, curved like a fragment of a face. This was found on the floor of the auction house near Lord Ashworth's body. It is not from the Hannya mask, which was destroyed above. It is from a second mask, a replica, made of the same porcelain, coated with the same poison that killed your husband. You pressed it against his throat in the darkness, delivered the fatal dose, and then threw the original mask from the gallery above to create a distraction. The replica shattered when you dropped it, but you did not have time to collect all the pieces. You killed twice, madame. Once to protect a secret, once to inherit a fortune. But your crimes are finished now. Inspector Japp is waiting outside, and you will return to London with him to face the consequences of your actions. Lady Ashworth looked around the room, her eyes wild, searching for some avenue of escape. But there was none. Cordelia's face was stone. Charles Ashworth had turned away in disgust. Even Dr. Vane, who had known her for years, could not meet her gaze.
You think you have won,
she said at last, her voice bitter.
But you understand nothing. The Ashworths are liars and thieves. They stole this house, this title, everything they have. I was only taking what should have been mine.
Nothing justifies murder, madame. Not greed, not revenge, not even justice. You took 2 lives and would have taken more. That is a debt that must be paid. Inspector Japp entered then, accompanied by 2 constables. Lady Ashworth did not struggle as they led her away. She walked with her head high, her spine straight, as though she were departing for a social engagement rather than a prison cell. When she was gone, the room seemed to exhale a collective breath. Cordelia moved to Poirot's side, her face pale but calm.
Is it over?
She asked. For Lady Ashworth, yes. Her crimes have finally caught up with her. But for you, mademoiselle, and for your family, this is only the beginning. The document I found raises questions about the Ashworth inheritance, questions that may take years to resolve.
I don't care about the inheritance. I never did. I only wanted the truth.
And now you have it. Whether it brings you peace or pain, only time will tell. Count Volkonsky approached, his face transformed by something that might have been hope.
The mask. The replica. What happened to the original? The one that was?
Destroyed at the auction. It is gone, Count. Shattered beyond repair. Whatever power it held, whatever curse you believe it carried, is ended now. Then Lydia can finally rest. I hope so, Count. For her sake, and for yours. The departure from Ashworth Hall took place the following morning, under skies that had cleared for the first time in days. The wind had dropped, the sun shone pale but warm, and the sea below the cliffs was almost calm, a mirror reflecting the infinite blue of winter. Poirot stood at the door of his hired car, his bags already loaded, his coat buttoned against the residual chill. Cordelia had come to see him off, along with Dr. Vane and Charles Ashworth, the latter looking considerably more relaxed than he had since his brother's death.
"Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," Cordelia said, extending her hand. "For everything. For my father and for Lydia."
"It was my honor, mademoiselle. Your father was a man who sought the truth, even when it was painful. In the end, the truth is all we have."
"And the Count? What will happen to him?"
Inspector Japp has agreed to drop any inquiry into his actions in 1908. He was guilty of cowardice, not murder. That is a crime for which the only punishment is conscience, and he has suffered enough.
He loved her, didn't he? Lydia.
With all his heart. And perhaps that love was what ultimately brought her justice. It was the Count's testimony that first led me to understand the truth, that the killer was not a stranger, but someone within the household, someone with a reason to silence Lydia forever.
"And the document? The one that proves the Ashworths are—"
She stopped, unable to say the word. "I have returned it to you, mademoiselle. What you do with it is your choice. You may pursue the truth, whatever that may be, or you may let the past remain buried. Either way, the decision is yours."
She nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful.
I think I will let it rest. The dead deserve their peace, and so do the living. Whatever my ancestors may have done, this is my home now. I will not abandon it for the sake of 100-year-old scandal.
A wise decision, mademoiselle, and a compassionate one.
Poirot climbed into the car, settling himself into the back seat with a sigh of satisfaction. The case was closed, the killer apprehended, and justice, imperfect though it was, had been served. There would be other mysteries, other crimes, other puzzles to solve. But for now, in this moment, he was content. As the car began its winding journey down from the cliff, he turned for one last look at Ashworth Hall. It stood silhouetted against the sky, its towers and battlements dark against the pale winter sun, its windows glinting like watchful eyes. Somewhere within those ancient walls, the portrait of Lydia Chen still smiled her secret smile, and the ghost of her memory lingered in the gallery where she had died. But the mask was gone. Shattered and destroyed, its fragments scattered like the pieces of a broken dream. The porcelain mask killer had claimed her final victim, and now the killing was done. Hercule Poirot adjusted his cravat, smoothed his magnificent moustache, and allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. "Justice," he murmured to himself, as the car turned onto the main road and Ashworth Hall vanished from view.
It is not always swift, not always complete, but it comes, mes amis. In the end, it always comes.
The road stretched before him, winding through moorland and village, carrying him back toward London and whatever new mysteries awaited there. The winter sun was warm on his face. The air was fresh with the scent of sea and heather, and somewhere in the distance, a bird was singing. It was, Hercule Poirot reflected, a good day to be alive.